Inverness, Highland Council, Castle Street, one-way restriction order 2020. I have to sort of remind myself of that prior to recording this video because it's quite a long name, and even in my attempts to remember as much as I could, I have admittedly forgotten an aspect of it, but nonetheless. This was an act that came into force, obviously, and as the name suggests, 2020. Temporary, right? All under the basis of trying to implement changes for the safety of the public. Now, for anybody that's not familiar with Inverness, a city that I am very familiar with, being a Highlander, this act was put into force, and what it did was it allowed for no longer two lanes of traffic, one going forward, one going back. It became a one-way system. And the excuse that they used at the time was that this was to allow for physical distancing, as it's now called, but social distancing at the time. It was allowed for that to occur safely as things began to reopen. Now, and I remember this at the time. I remember all of the daft modifications they made to the Inverness city centre at the time. And being somebody that was a quote-unquote COVID skeptic from a very early onset, I found a lot of their reasoning just nonsense. I do recall as well, now before I get into that, let me just tell you some of the other things that they did in and around Inverness before I kind of get to the substance of this video that I'm making here. From the bonny locks of a loch that I can't fucking remember the name, or the bonny shoreline of the loch I can't remember the name of, I should say. I've done 2 videos now at separate locks where I've made reference to this loch and I still can't remember the name of it. Nonetheless, some of the other stupid things that they did was there's a road that goes towards Morrison's in Inverness, and it's now 2 lanes again. It's not like a dual carriageway, it's just purely 2 lanes. One lane is simply for you to turn right to go into Morrison's, the other lane is to continue to go straight into the city centre. Initially during 2020, they made the ability to travel on the left-handed lane redundant, and they put up bollards and painted that lane green, which would sort of mimic Edinburgh and Glasgow's sort of bus lanes. Throughout the city centre, as small as it is, they put up these pillars / bollards, as well as bollards, red and white bollards. I remember speaking to people on Telegram, etc. at the time from Scotland who spoke of similar things being put up in their areas as well. Now, as I say, the excuse that the Highland Council gave was that this was being done to allow for social distancing to occur safely. Okay. I remember round about November time of 2020, the Highland Council came out again to say that a lot of the measures that they'd been putting into place were now remaining permanent. And as a result, what you see now, albeit Castle Street, is back to 2 lanes. The city centre in and of itself is sort of back to 2 lanes. The road I mentioned there about Morrison's is back to 2 lanes. But the green paint still remains, the bollards still remain, the post / pillar things still remain, and the signs still remain. And their reasoning though, however, regardless of what I've just said there, they said, and I recall it as clear as day, they said that a lot of the things that they'd implemented, the measures that they implemented, were going to remain in place because it reduced carbon emissions. It helped to reduce carbon emissions. I found that peculiar. You could maybe argue, or maybe I could argue, that there was an aspect of having a lot of what I'd said reaffirmed, vindicated in nature. You know? And it wasn't until last night that I had a brief discussion with somebody in my Telegram chat that I came across a PDF from the Highland Council, of all things. And may I just also add, this is all the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's currently plans in place, and this is part of a much larger, wider project for Inverness. But there's plans in place that would effectively, by the Highland Council's own admission, reduce, but they wish to reduce traffic in the city by 75%, or traffic in the city centre, may I emphasise, by 75%. And, you know, there's things that they wish to do, like sort of joining together the bus station and the train station, etc. They wish to reduce traffic and increase footfall. They've got all the lovely jubbly photos where everybody's walking about, there's green everywhere. Active travel's been emphasised. Sustainable travel. You know, all this shit. And it's been met with an aspect of pushback, thankfully. For now. It doesn't mean it's going to be permanent, nonetheless. So this has been in the news recently, Inverness Courier, etc., Highland News, and you know, this sort of stuff. There's a bit of pushback because obviously some of the points that were raised, the points of contention that were raised by business owners and business representatives were that if they reduce the traffic by around about 75%, if they achieve their target, what impact's that going to have on businesses? Because they pointed out Glasgow, with their LEZ zones, they've reduced traffic to a certain extent, but as a result, a detrimental result, businesses have been affected, some have even gone under. It's reduced footfall. You know, so obviously it's good to see that there is some sort of pushback in its current form, attacking the proposals that have been put on the table in their current form. But I want to sort of emphasise this master plan that they spoke of. Because I read through it last night, I read through it again before I start recording this video, and it really is so difficult to remember everything that you wish to speak of when you're recording via your phone. It would be so much easier to do this in a video. And so I can't really spend too much time trying to paraphrase points that I have read in this document. But one thing I did notice, may I just add, is that there was reference in this document that came out in 2021 to the Castle Street one-way system. And they called it temporary, but there were so many different actions that had been proposed, all under the banner of being temporary. And each and every single one of these actions that was suggested and put forth was that it was a risk to social distancing. Public health was a risk if they didn't implement this proposal. Public health would continue to be a risk if they don't implement this proposal, etc, etc, etc. And I'm not going to focus too much on that aspect of it, as I said, because I don't want to paraphrase things here. But let me just say this as well. This Highland Council Inverness Active Travel Master Plan had about 25 pages that explicitly state, in fact going into such grave detail, that each and every individual proposal that they had either suggested or have indeed already implemented in under the guise of protecting you from fucking COVID, explicitly stated that it was being done in conjunction / alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. So let me get this straight. They made Castle Street in Inverness a one-way system to help with social distancing, but it just so happens to align with the Sustainable Development Goals. They even mention it in this document from 2021, exactly what I just mentioned there about fucking the railway station, etc. It's all about footfall, presenting and promoting active travel / sustainable travel. You know? Page after page after page of their fucking very peculiar / questionably malevolent intentions are printed out in PDF format, all under the guise of making things better for you and I and both of our loved ones respectively.
My point really is here, without getting bogged too much down on trying to paraphrase things and going off topic, that initially all of these things, some of which were never mentioned, but you've seen yourself if you lived up here, a lot of these things, if not all of these things that were put into practice, you were told at the fucking time were to help protect you from COVID. Then they just so matter-of-factly talk about it explicitly in a PDF, and it becomes clear this is not about COVID. No, it's about climate change. It's about carbon. You know? It's mental. It's fucking mental. It really is just fucking bizarre. How the Highland Council could implement all of these policies back in 2020 and use COVID as their excuse. Because if anything, the other thing that I will say is the way that this PDF is sort of worded, it's one of two things. They use COVID from the get-go to sort of implement these things, or they've implemented these things and they've treated us like guinea pigs, and they're now exploiting COVID, quote unquote, because there's also the climate shit to take into consideration. It's just, I don't know, it's just fucking ridiculous. And then you see these like politicians always talking about, or even before I get to like humbler use of it, etc., it's like, who voted for this? I asked this question a few times in the past. Who votes for these things? It was pretty clear from very early on that the COVID stuff was never actually about COVID. And I think this sort of Inverness active travel Masterplan, as they called it, kind of shows to me anyway, if nothing else, that they put all these measures into place, branded them temporary, right? And they were put into place to see what could be done to reduce carbon. Now they've got something to work with going forward. They know it can be done. Not only do they know that people will become submissive very simply and very quickly, provided that they implement the right fucking tools and nudge units, etc., but they know that things can be done. COVID was the test you could make the argument for. And as times are progressing throughout the decade of action, which is a literal United Nations trope, the decade of action, which was an announcement from the United Nations in 2020. Well, it was sort of announced prior to that, 2019. But in 2020, the New Year's message was sort of the kickstarter for it. Antonio Guterres, the Portuguese Socialist United Nations General Secretary, came out with his United Nations message in 2020, the very beginning of the year. And he said that the decade of action, this is the decade of action. And the decade of action is the acceleration of the transformation of all of our nations to ensure that we reach the 2030 targets. Fast forward a few months, sorry, not years. What do we see? We see COVID. We see COVID. Now on a sort of constituency scale, COVID, I make the argument, was a test. Nationally, a test. Internationally, even a fucking test. Part of the puzzle. Right? The wheels are now in motion, now we just crank things up a gear. The sustainable developments, of course, include climate change, and what have we seen in the last few years. I'm pretty sure it was 2019, 2020, I think it was 2019 actually, that climate change was declared a climate emergency. So my point really here is, though, that now we're just seeing the fruits of that labour. We're seeing all these wildfires kicking off around the joint. Just everywhere you look. You're all across Hawaii now, Canada again. Prior to that was Greece and fucking Italy. But if you look at the maps, It's like fire starting all over the place. Now, the initial implication that they wish for you to consume is that it's so fucking hot that the earth's burning and scorching because of climate change, right? But then when you look at the maps, and then you realise, wow, okay, well, it's so fucking hot, but yeah, fires are starting everywhere. It's so hot, the sun is making fires start everywhere in all these different parts. Then it always seems to come out that it's arson, or it's suspected arson. So then they have the caveat, the pushback of that. Oh no, but it's because scientists and climate change and the conditions are correct for fires to occur. Oh, bollocks. Just fuck off. But this is the new one now. And it's funny how they use Cannock in the Highlands. Only about an hour from where I stand right now at present. In fact, probably less so, because this is more near Fort Augustus area where I am at present. But, you know, Cannock, the worst wildfire that the Highlands of Scotland's seen for some time. Maggie Chapman, the Greens, etc., all coming out in their droves, the SNP, etc., to say that this is climate change. And the fucking fire department, etc., all come out to say that it was most likely arson, and you know, they said you know, accidental. And there was another one at Davia, accidental. Nonetheless, for the longest time, climate change. Everything's about climate change. Mass action needs to be taken for climate change. Everything's about climate change. So we've got arsonists. We've just got, even if you take arson out of the question, and it was just people making mistakes or whatever the fuck you will. The point is this still, that you have people exploiting scenarios that occur. You have people exploiting fires and hurricanes, etc., to push a narrative. And all the while, you've got our councils pushing the same bullshit, or acting upon the same bullshit information, and beginning procedures to implement their active travel master plans to reduce travel obviously on a national scale across Scotland. You see that anyway, with LEZ zones cropping up, etc. The push to reduce overall car use by 20 kilometres per person, or some nonsense, annually. And all across the Transport Scotland PDFs and the Scottish Government PDFs, they make many a reference to all the different methodologies that they're going to implement in order to achieve this outcome. And then it all adds in a lovely sweet caveat at the bottom of their fucking PDFs that if all of this fails, they'll just start to financially constrain people to the point where they come off the road themselves via increased taxes, etc. This is all under the guise of climate change, but my point, my friends, is this: that it was only a few fucking years ago that they told you it was due to COVID. Adios, amigos.